The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. My name is Keegan Ebbets. I'm with ICF. We are the vendor working on behalf of the sponsors of Energize Connecticut to bring these Passive House and all-electric homes trainings to you all. These trainings are at no cost thanks to the sponsors of Energize Connecticut and are part of a partnership with Connecticut Passive House and Build Green CT. Today's training will be recorded and will be made available online afterwards. And as a reminder, as part of the Training Workforce Development Initiative, we offer a 75% cost reimbursement for individuals pursuing either FIAS or PHI professional accreditation. This includes the cost of the trainings and the exam. And once you become certified, we work with you to process the 75% cost reimbursement. If you have questions about the reimbursement process, please contact us. Aaron, if you want to go to the next slide. And so in addition to the no-cost educational workforce development series and the accreditation reimbursements, the sponsors of Energize Connecticut also offer robust incentives for builders and developers who choose to go all electric with their residential buildings or to pursue Passive House certification in multifamily projects with 5 or more units. Next slide, Aaron. The Passive House incentive design for Energize Connecticut is shown here and includes pre-construction incentives for things like feasibility studies and energy modeling and post-construction incentives for full Passive House certification. Next one, the all-electric incentive is for both single-family and multifamily buildings. It offers 2 levels of eligibility with specific design and performance requirements associated for each, and has incentives ranging from $1,500 a unit for multifamily all the way up to $10,000 for single-family homes. Our goal is for everyone involved in the construction of residential buildings in the state of Connecticut to be aware of these incentives. So if you're interested in learning more, please visit our website or contact us directly. And as for today's questions throughout the session, please feel free to use the chat function on the GoToWebinar control panel, and we will relay them to the speakers. And so with that, I will introduce today's speakers, Craig Foley and Aaron Gunderson. Take it away, guys.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, Keegan, I actually have a question before we get started with Aaron. You still on, Keegan?
Yes. Yeah, we got it.
So just, for the real estate agents online, I think many of us may assume that builders know about these pretty powerful incentives that are out there, both, the ones that you guys are providing as well as the federal incentives. But in actual daily working knowledge, I find that many builders actually don't realize that there are these kinds of resources for building these projects. I don't know, is that true from your perspective, I guess?
I'd say it varies throughout the market, depending on certain familiarity or relationships to folks with knowledge of the program. But it runs the gamut from, full knowledge to hearing about it for the first time.
Well, I just wonder, if realtors have a role here, if they're working with new construction partners, builders in particular, to make sure that they're aware of some of these incentives that are out there. Mm-hmm. It's just another point of contact. You mentioned all parts of the real estate industry being involved with this. I think we do have a role as real estate agents to be able to, I know I do, I pass these incentives on to builders that I work with, and it's been meaningful, definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's a huge point. These incentives we have. So I'm in Massachusetts, and we had similar incentives rolled out there that have been enormously successful in terms of like the number of projects enrolling in them. But to your point, Craig, it's always a challenge to make sure the right people know about them, whether it's the developer on a large-scale project, or if it's the homeowner client on a small building, or the builder who might be the person leading the charge on a small project as well. Right. They need to know about this.
Yeah, and I think for homeowners, even incentives, through the federal government now with the Inflation Reduction Act and the power of, particularly for us as realtors, Aaron, we have a tax appetite, right? We're independent contractors. We have a big year, and I'll tell you, when it gets to April 15th, it's brutal, dude. I mean, it is harsh out there. So just introducing realtors to the fact that the federal government is willing to invest in your own personal home for income producing properties, and give you significant tax credits for being able to do that is a powerful tool just for our realtors. And then, having taken advantage of some of those for my own house, being able to then tell my clients, particularly my buyer clients that are current homeowners, about these opportunities to green up their home, to make their home more comfortable, safe, better indoor air quality, lower, cost of living. This is a huge opportunity for realtors to connect to people in this.
Very true. So maybe we should do some introductions right now. We'll get into the presentation. So I'm Aaron Gunderson. I'm the Executive Director of Passive House Massachusetts. So up in the neighboring state here. But we do a lot of building education and training and advocacy for the passive house building standard and around high performance building in general. We also have partnered with Connecticut Passive House in the past to run programming. They're a wonderful organization there. So for those of you on this call who are not yet connected to Connecticut Passive House or sort of aware of the work they do, definitely look into them, go to their website. They do different events and trainings that are local to Connecticut, so take advantage of those. I'm going to turn it over to Craig here to just briefly introduce himself as well.
Sure. My name is Craig Foley. I'm a realtor in the greater Boston area. I'm also the Chief Sustainability Officer for our company, LAER Realty Partners. Do a lot of work training realtors in this. I teach the NAR Green Designation. In fact, right now, I'm one of the 3 people, we get funded every 3 years to rewrite the designation. We're in the midst of a massive restructuring of the green designation, Aaron. I think we're on to some, the next step of exciting content in this rapidly evolving world of high performance homes, not only in new construction, but existing homes. I'm in an 1895 Victorian, my home right now, that has a HERS score of 59. My wife and I did deep energy retrofit. We decarbonized our home, we took out the natural gas, we switched to heat pump hot water heater. And the big win for me, Aaron, was my wife is a phenomenal cook, right? I'm a decent cook, but she was really having trouble with the move from a natural gas cooktop to induction, the latest, great innovation in the cooktop industry. And so I kept on sending her, YouTube videos of professional chefs that, think that induction is absolutely the way to go. And I actually won like the first domestic argument in 30 years of marriage, Aaron, and we have an induction cooktop, and now neither one of us would go back. So
similar story I hear. People reject it at first, but then once they use one.
Yeah.
Here is our agenda for today. We're going to try to cover kind of a lot of ground. We're going to talk about the market opportunity of high performance buildings. We're going to give a short overview of what high performance buildings are. So what does it mean to be a high performance home and a passive house home? We want you folks to kind of have an understanding of what that means. We'll do some short case studies of some passive house buildings that were on the market and just talk a little bit about them. And then we'll end with some best practices of marketing and valuation for the projects. The reality, though, is this is going to be a discussion. It's going to be a discussion between me and Craig, and it's going to be a discussion between us and you. So feel free to jump in and ask questions. We can see the questions. There is one in there right now about the PowerPoint slides, and I think we can get those sent out. But if you have other questions as we go through this, definitely jump in, ask some questions. Otherwise, we're going to spend the next, now a little bit less than 2 hours really diving in to what high performance buildings are and the impact on the market. So we'll start with the market opportunity of high performance. And Craig, I'll let you kick off this section.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we are seeing, realtors that are knowledgeable and competent in this industry, right? So there's a difference between, what we do as real estate agents every day is help clients, buyers, and sellers. There's no question about it. And we're fortunate. I mean, why I love the business so much is that U.S. wealth building is really built on home ownership, successful home ownership, right? The difference between a renter's net worth and a homeowner's net worth is 40 times more powerful as a homeowner. So that's something every realtor that's on the screen can relate to. We really provide a service in the most complicated transaction, the most eventful transaction in the average U.S. consumer's lifetime, and we're all very proud of that. But there is now a very rapidly emerging market opportunity in this green or high performance home building space, both for new construction and in home remodels like the one that I did, Aaron. We're seeing more and more consumers moving to this place for a lot of different reasons. We'll cover some of those reasons, the benefits of owning a high performance home in the last part of this. But the big picture overview is that there's a lot happening here. There's no question about it. And there's a great resource that's out. This is one of the resources that has jumped to the marketplace since the last time we rewrote the green designation, the Green Building Registry. So you can see there's over 193,000 homes in Massachusetts that are on that registry right now. So there's a lot of movement in this marketplace. There's no question about it. And there's vast opportunity here for realtors to not only work with builders, but also engage your home. You know, look, we're dealing with a lot of stuff going on in the marketplace right now, Aaron. You know, I mean, I'm sure everybody's aware of the news, you know, what's going on with the settlement case with National Association of Realtors. What's our value proposition going to be with buyers moving forward through all of this settlement dysfunction, you know? And I think one of those is, you know, working with buyers that are, you know, understanding that there's a climate challenge out there, understanding that utility costs are rising through the roof, understanding that homeowners insurance costs in some states, and that's going to continue to move north, are flying through the roof right now. So, you know, there's a great opportunity for the stuff that you and I care about to help inform current homeowners, you know, buyers, home sellers, about the advantages of improving their property with high performance features, air sealing, insulation, the new technology that's out there, the revolution in HVAC technology that's out there with heat pumps, which we have for heating and cooling our home. And my 1895 Victorian has never been so comfortable, Aaron, as it is right now. I'm in the top floor. It would have been terribly uncomfortable on a day like this, and now it's just fantastic, you know, and the home just performs a lot better. So there's this huge market opportunity here for all of us to embrace, but it requires not only knowledge, but execution, right? So how do you take some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today and actually turn this into executing your business, right? And I think, you know, one of the big execution pieces here is, for instance, with the IRA, the Rewiring America has an IRA calculator, for instance. You know, just reaching out to your past buyers, your current homeowners, and letting them know about these substantial tax savings that are out there is just a huge benefit, and it's so much better than sending them another Red Sox calendar, which is what every realtor does, you know. And the Red Sox kind of stink this year, you know, as well. So yeah.
Well, Craig, I just want to ask one question here. That we put this slide together for Massachusetts, but I'm assuming this is similar in Connecticut with similar programs available, similar numbers that you've seen.
Yeah, so I'll give you an update on the Green Building Registry specifically, right? Mm-hmm. So in Massachusetts, we have some ability to be able to share data that Connecticut doesn't. So so Connecticut, what you see on the Green Building Registry is less than 13,000 homes with significant green building improvements. Those almost across the board are homes that have HERS scores, Home Energy Rating Scorecard. We'll talk about that later. But they don't have access to the solar PV data, which we do in Massachusetts, because we're unusual the way that we're set up. We have the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center that has a production tracking system. That, through a FOA request, is accessible through public information records. So that data has been downloaded to Green Building Registry. One of the other pieces that Connecticut has that Massachusetts does not have, but it doesn't seem to be reflected in the Green Building Registry, is a really terrific option that homeowners have when they have a home energy assessment in Connecticut. They also get a home energy score, so the US DOE's home energy score. And I don't see any record of that in the Green Building Registry. So there's a lot more in Connecticut than what you see on the registry. But if you start to click on the registry on those, 13,000 homes or so in Connecticut, you go down to the address and what the HERS score of the home actually is, right? So just from even a marketing perspective, again, execution is power. If you're in Hartford and there's 600 homes or something, and you serve Hartford, you might want to start to just download some of those addresses and see if you can start to connect to some of those homeowners. Who knows when they're going to sell? But yeah, there's huge opportunities here as well. Yeah, that's my home right there, 1895 Victorian. You can see, and this is an important piece, Aaron, of the real estate discussion. So you can see the annual savings right in the middle, a little bit over $3,700. That was verified by a third party, our HERS rater, which is Advanced Building Analysis. And
you mentioned getting a HERS score when you got an audit. Yours was 59, it looks like.
Yes. Yeah. After we did the improvements of the home, we filled it with closed cell spray foam. We, went to heat pumps, as I said. We decarbonized the home. We don't have any solar PV, which we're going to add. Hopefully this year that will drop that HERS score by probably another 20 points. But the middle number, the $3,711. One of the things when I teach the green designation, Aaron, is I'll hear realtors say, oh, all of this stuff is great, but appraisers don't recognize this stuff. That is BS, okay? So there are appraisers that have gone through the Appraisal Institute's Valuation of Green Buildings program. There's probably a dozen of them in the state of Connecticut. Now, we can't pick a specific appraiser because of the breakdown of everything that happened with the mortgage meltdown in 2008. But as a listing agent, I can demand a qualified appraiser, right? So I can demand that we get one of those appraisers that have gone through the valuation of sustainable buildings to do the appraisal on the house after we're under agreement, right? And they'll take that $3,700 number right there and do a net present value approach to add contributory value. So this isn't just about the comps anymore. There's different valuation processes that are in play that listing agents taking control of the transaction really need to be aware of. And certainly we cover this a lot in the green designation, the National Association of Realtors Green Designation.
We have a few slides on HERS scores here. We'll talk about a little more of them later. Some of this references Massachusetts data. That's just because me and Craig have a lot more access to that data, so we're going to present it. But a lot of this is similar in Connecticut. So we've been talking about HERS scores for a while. So when HERS was created, they used HERS 100 as sort of a reference home. So you see here, it says around a 2006 new home would be a HERS 100. Anything lower than that is a better performing home. Anything higher than that is going to be a worse performing home. So taking a home that already exists and renovating it like Craig did and getting to a 59 is pretty good. What we're now seeing for new homes that are being built with this sort of stuff in mind is they're going to get, you can see an average of 51 right there for a brand new home being built from the ground up with all of this kind of in mind. And we're seeing the best performing homes being around a 30 to 40.
I listed a set of condos in Boston, Aaron, in 2017, right? So this was a while ago. And those 4 condos had HERS scores that ranged between -14 and -23. So those homes are producing more power than they're using on an annual basis. And one of the benefits of that for the homeowners were there was a state incentive for solar PV at the time that was in play called the SREC program. And that incentive was so powerful that we determined for the first 10 years of ownership, so that will be through 2027, whoever owns the home that chose to own the solar PV system, we gave them the option for doing that. 3 out of the 4 did. We conservatively estimated that the check that they were going to get from the utility company on a quarterly basis was going to exceed their annual homeowner association fees. and they have done that plus. So, I mean, there are just huge benefits here as you start to dig into the weeds about how to market all this stuff and how it works. But again, this stuff has been in the market for a long time, and you know, the more realtors that get it, the better, definitely.
Yeah. And it's not that rare of a story. When I just said the best, performing homes are in that 30 to 40 range, that's before we're taking renewable energy into account. You put solar panels on the top of those homes now on their roof, and now they can provide all the energy they need. And in some of these cases, like Craig's mentioning, they produce extra power, more than that home needs. We call it net positive, and it's amazing.
I mean, can you imagine, instead of getting a utility bill from the utility company, you're actually sending them an invoice for the power that you're producing and sending back to the grid, and they pay you for it. I mean, it's amazing what's going on in the marketplace right now.
So I was just going through a few different slides here. We have a few that were about some code changes in Massachusetts. I'm gonna skip over for a moment. We can come back because there's some code discussions we can have around the building code for folks who are interested. But I do want to highlight this for a little bit and just talk about kind of the growth we've been seeing. So today we're going to kind of go between a few different terms. We're going to talk about high performance. We're going to talk about passive house, and we're going to talk about more specific passive house terms like FIAS. So high performance, we'll give a definition of that later, but we simply usually mean energy performance when we say high performance. We sort of mean like those homes that have a lower HERS score would be a high performance home. Passive house, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later today as well. The passive house is a specific certification that you can achieve when a house has a significantly low energy use. FIAS is the largest certification body here in the US for certifying those homes. So when we say a house is a FIAS certified home, that means it went through a passive house certification. Now, this is a chart. It's a couple years old. It ends at 2021, as you will see. But the growth is worth talking about. So we're looking at the 4 Northeast states that have the largest or the most number of passive house projects in them. So apologies to Vermont and Rhode Island and other states here that don't quite have a lot of passive house yet, but Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New York, and Connecticut have been the leaders. And you can sort of see the rise in different states. New York, definitely the largest center of passive house for a long time. You can see the blue bar there in 2020, that's Massachusetts jumping up. And in 2021, Massachusetts exceeded New York. And then you can see that green bar, that's Connecticut. And that's sort of rising up a little bit. It's higher in 2021 than New York. And one of the drivers behind a lot of this is those incentives that we showed earlier. Massachusetts rolled out the passive house incentives initially in, I believe, 2019, I want to say is the first year they were available. And we saw a large increase in passive house projects due to that. And now that Connecticut has those same incentives, we're starting to see that go up. And I don't have more recent data, but when I get it from FIAS, I expect that green bar to be dramatically higher and closing in on the Massachusetts bar as well.
And Aaron, can I ask a question of you here?
Yeah, please do.
Passive house is the certification, right? So it implies homes exclusively, but that's not really the case, is my understanding. I mean, particularly with multifamily units and even commercial buildings going passive house, right? This is more really a passive building certification.
Correct. And that's a really great point, and something that it's the fault of the name, passive house, but what we mean when we say passive house is actually passive building. You're exactly right. Any building type can be certified as a passive house. You can have a large multifamily building or a small single family building or some type of townhouse in the middle. You can also have a commercial building, so a commercial office building, or you could have, say, a school. You could have large office buildings. We'll show a few examples here maybe in a little while, but there's a wide variety of different projects. In fact, I have a few interesting ones in Connecticut to show in a little bit that might surprise you of the different types of projects that can achieve passive house certification. For us today, we're mostly kind of focused on homes, as that's what I think most people here are interested in. I don't know how many commercial real estate agents we have on the call, but yes, any building can achieve passive house. These numbers are looking specifically at residential projects. So the graph right now. So this is that. So this is just showing you, so the incentives that Keegan went over at the beginning of this call, they're similar incentives. They're run through a program called Mass Save in Massachusetts. But this is just showing you the growth that we saw once those incentives went into effect. The years go so far in the future here because this is based on estimated completion date of the building. So that's why we have projects going up into 2029. But the main purpose for you guys to look at this is to see when because those incentives went into place, it took about a year or so, and then all of a sudden we have this enormous growth. So we expect Connecticut to kind of experience similar growth in the terms of passive house due to the incentives that have been rolled out there now through Energize Connecticut. So I don't have that data here to share with you today, but I hope in the future we'll have it and we can show you this dramatic increase in passive house projects in Connecticut due to those incentives. I have a couple slides here. I just want to talk about overall costs. So there's a lot of questions that come up around, okay, we're going to build these higher performing buildings, but does it cost more to build them? Maybe we'll save some money in the operation of them, but what about that upfront cost to actually construct them? So, this data is on multifamily projects right here. And this was collected from the Mass CEC up in Massachusetts. They studied around 8 different passive house projects that they funded, and they found an average incremental cost to a sheet passive house of 2%. And you're seeing a variety of projects here from 1.4% at that Finch Cambridge project. There were a couple that were higher, that Old Colony one, that's right in Boston at 2.8%. But this is the incremental cost. And they track kind of where this came from. Some of this incremental cost came from using a higher quality ventilation system. Some came from using better windows. So maybe that might be where they saw some of the costs. But this is what they saw, what they experienced. And this data now is actually a couple years old. And what we're hearing, we haven't gotten to the point of having the concrete data yet, but what we're hearing from projects under construction is that this number is getting closer and closer to 1%, closer to 0%. Basically, passive house is becoming just another decision a project makes, not a huge cost driver.
Well, there are cost savings involved with this, Aaron, as well. That
yes,
I'll just give you my personal experience, right? Working on this Victorian, right? So when we started the project, I asked my builder and architect, what's it going to cost me? We did a massive renovation of this home. We moved the kitchen from one side of the building to the other. We took out one bath, added 2 more. So it was a huge renovation down to the studs. And, we had a natural gas heating system. The only thing we had for AC was the window units, which look ugly on a building, and they're terribly inefficient. So I asked, there was no way I was going to go down to the studs and not add AC, right? So I asked the builder, look, what's it going to cost me if we get a new natural gas system, because that was at the end of its life, plus a new AC system. Oh, and by the way, there's no duct work in an 1895 Victorian, so we're going to have to run all the ducts. What's that going to cost me? John said, probably $45,000. I said, well, what about heat pumps, right? What's that going to cost me? So one system does the heating and cooling super efficiently. And he said $25,000. And it came in a little bit under that, but I got a $10,000 incentive through Mass Save. I got a check for $10,000. So it was like $15,000 out of pocket rather than $45,000 doing it the traditional way. There are definitely cost savings involved with this as well.
Well, certainly. And we see that in a lot of the HVAC systems. I mean, you might need a new ventilation system that you don't need in a different building, but your heating and cooling system can be a lot smaller size because the heating demand, the cooling demand you need in your building from your system is so much dramatically lower than in a typical building that system can be sized a lot smaller, giving you a lot of cost savings. So some of these projects actually noted that. In fact, the Mass CEC, I don't have it here. Maybe we can send it out for folks who are interested, but they actually put a report together of these projects where they actually listed some of those things, what costed more, what costed less. And the HVAC system, not the ventilation system, but the heating and cooling system is where they saved money. Pretty incredible, just because they were able to have a smaller size heating and cooling system. I have a couple, this is a little bit of data as well. This is Pennsylvania. So if you guys noticed on the graph a little bit ago when I was talking about the 4 Northeast states that are leading the way, Pennsylvania is one of them. And part of that is that Pennsylvania took one of the first steps to incentivize passive house projects. Specifically, they incentivized projects that were being awarded affordable housing financing through the PHFA, through their Affordable Housing Financing Agency. So what we have here is some data showing you the cost of those projects. So what we're looking at is the cost of projects that went through affordable housing financing that were passive house compared to the ones that were not passive house that went through this financing. And what you're looking at on this graph is that the ones that, oh, sorry, I have to move something on my screen so I can see. The ones in sort of your orange color were the projects that were awarded passive house. Sorry, they were passive house projects that were awarded funding. The ones that you're seeing in sort of a gray color, those are the non-passive house projects that were awarded funding. And you're looking at the costs on the Y graph, so how much cost per square foot, and then the costs, the square foot on the bottom, so you can see the size. But the main takeaway, if you look at this, is the scattering of it. Passive house projects are all over the map, just like the non-passive house projects are all over the map. The reality is passive house was not the main driver of costs in any of these projects. Some of them were more expensive, some of them were less expensive. The real big takeaway, which was a huge surprise, is the average difference between the passive house and non-passive house projects was negative 2% in 2018. That meant the passive house projects on average were 2% less than the non-passive house projects. Pretty surprising, but something they continue to see is that passive house hovers right around that 0%, sometimes a little cheaper, sometimes maybe creeping up a little bit more, but it's right around basically being the same as non-passive house projects. In other words, it doesn't matter anymore to the cost that you're trying to achieve passive house.
I think one thing to add, that's great data, by the way. I don't think I've seen that chart. But, you know, realtors on the line may be aware of other green building certifications like LEED, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, or National Green Building Standard, or Energy Star rated buildings. Passive house, my opinion, Aaron, is that this is the most rigorous of the building envelope certifications by far. In fact, it's pushing NGBS and LEED to increase the rigor in their building envelope. So this is the, from on some level, from a cost perspective, you would think that this would be fairly expensive because of the rigor that you have to get to. And it's so great to see that builders are getting it and learning how to do this cost effectively.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And we'll get through some details here today where we'll talk a little bit about what sets these buildings apart, like how do they look different, what is going into these buildings to make them perform better. And what we'll see is a lot of the details are attention to details. It's simply doing, paying more attention during the construction process. Maybe you might be using some newer materials, and we'll talk about some of that. But a lot of it is the contractors, the trades, they get excited about this because their job matters a lot more than it does on a typical project. The quality they put into it makes a huge difference.
Well, getting the subs on board, the framers, you know, I mean, everybody has to be on board with this stuff.
So now, Craig, I'll also let you talk about this here.
Yeah, I'll take this.
That was about the kind of construction costs, but now let's get into the actual operating costs.
Yeah, this is an interesting home. It's in Salisbury, Massachusetts. Family of 4 lives there. You can see that they have a power plant on their rooftop, which is a solar PV home. So photovoltaic home. That set of solar panels is converting the sun's energy into electricity to do everything for this home. It's an all-electric home, so a lot like mine. They've switched to heat pumps, or they built with heat pumps, heat pump hot water heater, induction cooktop, and they have in their garage an electric vehicle that they also power for this. So just quickly, you know, if we added up our cost for what it costs to heat our home every year in the Northeast on a yearly average, might, you know, depending on the size of the home, that might be $3,000 to $4,000. So you're heating with oil, with natural gas, with propane, all of those have different costs. What does it cost to cool your home in the summer, or your electricity bills in general? If you've got AC, we know that those spike during the summer months when we're trying to cool our home as well. Might be an additional $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 for your electricity costs, right? And then if you add in, just for the fun of it, what it costs a realtor using their car to show homes all the time, right? And you figure out what your costs are on an annual basis, it might be another $2 grand that's involved with that. You know, we definitely can see, you know, a range of $6,000 to $12,000 of operating expenses for those three things. Now, remember, these guys have an electric vehicle that they're also powering from that power plant on their rooftop, as well as their whole home. And their total costs for the entire year, Aaron, you can flip to the next slide, is $434. That's not per month. That's for the entire year, to heat, light, cool their home, all their gadgets and appliances, their showers. They've got 2 kids, just like all of us do. They take 45-minute showers, you know, and they're running an electric vehicle off this, and it costs them $434 for this net zero home. I mean, when we talk about cost savings, it's through the roof, and you can't, you know, particularly if we have a qualified appraiser, this can be valued in the marketplace down to the appraisal.
Yeah, it's we see that story a lot. I mean, the EV, we see those on some houses having the EV charger, but when that's installed, I think that's an incredible story. They're not only powering their whole house, they're powering all of their travel as well. This is a house in Wayland, Massachusetts, 4,500 square feet. I mean, this is a large house, but they have a heat pump, air source heat pump for heating. But the amount of energy that they're using to power that is the equivalent of a single burner stovetop for heat in the winter. And there's been winters. These owners actually allow people to have tours of their home quite a bit. And they've told stories where in some of the more milder winters, they don't turn their heat pump on at all throughout the winter. They may use it in the summer for cooling a little bit, but they don't even use it because heat gets produced. Sure, we have a heating system that produces heat, but something we might talk about as we get into kind of the details of passive house in a little bit is heat can come from other places. Heat comes from us. We produce heat. Our bodies produce heat. Our appliances produce heat. The sunlight shining through the windows produces some heat. And when you have a really well-built building with a well-insulated and airtight exterior envelope, you can trap a lot of that heat in. So that's why a house like this can go through a winter without using very much heat at all, because they're just trapping in the heat that's already there.
And I can hear the realtors on the other side of this line saying, oh my God, you know, be careful. Homes have to breathe. We're building them too tight, right? So I get this in my class all the time. And I just want to dispel a myth right now. There is no such thing as a too tight building. There is such a thing as a too tight building without proper ventilation. So ventilation, as Aaron said, particularly for homes built to the passive house standard, is really important. For my home, you know, I have 4 Panasonic Whispers and 3 Panasonic Whispers in the 3 bathrooms, and a really good, even though we've got an induction cooktop, we've got a really good vent over the stove. And I found if I just start to think about how to use those appropriately for airflow, it takes care of everything for an 1895 building envelope, right? Yeah. But this kind of system is a completely different animal. And that's where we require energy recovery ventilation systems in the Northeast to be part of the whole process. And that, from an indoor air quality perspective, with an ERV in the home, that is a real selling point for home buyers. In particular, if their kids have respiratory issues, or they have respiratory issues, they know more about high performance homes and indoor air quality than their buyer's agents that do in many examples.
Yeah, it's a great point. I always like to say that you're right. Homes do need to breathe, but they need to do it through a respiratory system, not just through holes everywhere. So what we do is we put lungs into these buildings. That's the ventilation system. Right. We actually design it in a way where it can function effectively and efficiently. So yeah, exactly.
That's a really good point. So kind of the equivalent to that is explaining to realtors, right, that yeah, homes have to breathe and our bodies have to breathe, but we don't take a knife and stab our lungs to get air in there. We have a system for that, right? And that's what these homes do.
Exactly. Yeah. This is just some background data. We'll go through this quick, but this is some old numbers at this point anyway, but it's meant to emphasize why we're even doing this in the first place. The reality is our buildings are a large source of energy use. This data is showing 48% of US energy, so energy in this country comes from buildings. So you compare that to other sources of energy, transportation, industrial, agricultural, all these other ways we use energy. Buildings are nearly half of that. So when we talk about energy crises or trying to reduce our energy demand or reduce the pollution we make from energy use, buildings are a large focus. And that's why we're doing this, is why a lot of cities and towns and states are creating their own zoning initiatives, or in some cases building code initiatives, to really address the energy use of buildings. It's because buildings just use far too much energy. They don't need to, but they do. That produces a lot of.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
Right here. Yeah. No, I was going to say, let's not forget climate change, because greenhouse gas emissions are a driver. I mean, if you believe the science, right? And the science is very clear that greenhouse gas emissions are what's driving this changing climate. Climate risk is a big issue in the real estate industry right now. We're seeing it firsthand with homeowner insurance costs going up, right? So there's a growing awareness in our industry, Aaron, that we have a responsibility as National Association of Realtors to start to address this crisis as well. And we know for sure, and I think people, feel like, well, if I buy an electric vehicle, I'll solve the problem. And you're helping to solve the problem, definitely. But the real big challenge is in the built environment. The buildings that we live, work, play in, those are a big driver for greenhouse gas emissions. And again, we have such a huge opportunity in the real estate community to inform, to guide our past, present, and future customers through this process of lowering of being good neighbors, essentially, of contributing to everything we need to contribute to make a sustainable future happen.
Yep. And so a large focus of that is changing the way we produce energy. So solar power helps us do that. But equal to that, in some cases, even more important, is reducing the energy demand to begin with, just reducing the amount of energy we use in our buildings. And when I say that, I want to be clear that I'm not trying to say we need people in their homes to use their appliances less, or turn off their TV, or have their lights dimmer. That's not the type of changes I'm talking about. I'm talking about these large sources of energy, mainly space conditioning is the large one. And we'll talk about that in a little bit moment. So I just want to rephrase. We're not trying to really interfere with people's lives in their homes by having them make all these sort of lifestyle changes. What we really want are to address the large sources of building energy. At the same time, ensure that they can have an even more comfortable home and even better air quality, and hopefully kind of their experience will be improved by these changes. So, I'll let you go ahead on this one.
Yeah, so National Association of Realtors, I do a lot of work with NAR on this topic, and I have the, pleasure of serving on NAR's executive committee this year, which has been quite a ride to watch everything happen with a front row seat. But you can see that NAR is more engaged than ever in terms of understanding what's going on here with climate risk, what it means to the industry, which is pretty powerful. I mean, Mortgage Bankers Association, very engaged on this topic. The insurance industry, obviously very engaged on this topic. So there's a real movement at the 30,000 foot level of the real estate industry, of organized real estate, that we really have a responsibility here to tackle this. And what I've seen, Aaron, over the last 5 or 6 years at National Association of Realtors has been nothing short of incredible to see how our leadership team has really, understood that we have a huge challenge and a huge opportunity here to deal with it. In fact, my role on the executive committee comes from the fact that now we have a permanent, and I'm honored to be the first person to serve in this role, a permanent position on the executive committee that is a sustainability expert. So just in terms of the culture shift that's happened at National Association of Realtors over the last 4 or 5 years in particular has really been incredible to watch here. And that's an important message to get out to the realtors here, that we're really moving forward with with this stuff as a trade organization.
Speaking of climate change, here's one of those photos. This is downtown Boston in a couple winters ago. Flooded and frozen. I don't know if you can tell, but in the back of this photo is a T station that's underground, and that was flooded and frozen as well. So the impacts are dramatic. We're not just talking about, I mean, we're talking about lots of health issues. There's things like with flooding issues. There's all sorts of problems that are going on. And this just gets a little bit more into that buildings that we were talking about. So we're diving into building operations and building materials. So when we say buildings use almost half the energy, this is what we're looking at. This chart is specifically showing global emissions as opposed to US emissions. But you can kind of see a little bit there. So what I want to kind of get into a little bit here is kind of what I hinted at earlier, where what are we focusing on in buildings? Because again, I don't want to make it seem like we're asking homeowners to change the way they live and to use less energy in kind of their daily lives and what they experience. We're trying to make their home more efficient. And you can see why. This is the Northeast. So this includes Connecticut and the whole Northeast region. How do homes use energy? The orange bar, or the orange piece of that pie, is space heating. That's nearly 60%. So in a residential single-family home in the Northeast, around 60% of the total energy we use is used to heat our home. That's it. It just goes to heating. Whether we're using our natural gas boiler, an old oil system, or even a new efficient system, average is 60% of our energy is space heating. And then you can see a little sliver there of gray, which goes to air conditioning. So that's our air conditioning systems. And then we have water heating, of course, that takes up a large chunk of that as well, and then a few other things. But if we really want to reduce the energy demand of our buildings, what you can see by this chart is we're not going to focus on lighting. We're not going to focus on refrigerators and other appliances. What we are going to address is space conditioning. And really in the Northeast is heating more than it is anything else, reducing the energy we need to heat our buildings. And you can see this
Can
by
I just make a
region.
comment on that
Yes,
system,
go ahead.
Aaron? Because
Yeah,
just
please.
from a real estate perspective as well, right? We've been in a very aggressive market over the last 3 or 4 years in particular, in which buyers have no leverage in the real estate transaction. They're competing against multiple offers. They oftentimes have no opportunity for a home inspection. They waive their right for a home inspection just to compete in this marketplace. Even as crazy as I've seen home buyers waive their right for a mortgage contingency, even they're going for a bank for lenders. So crazy stuff to even land a home in the Northeast. And any buyer could look at this system and say, that's at the end of its natural life, this natural gas heating system that's here. What am I going to do when that thing goes out? Because it's not going to be very long into the future for me to have to deal with that. I don't need a home inspector to tell me this, right? So one of the things that I found gives my buyers a great sense of relief is the fact that these incentives that are out there, including in Massachusetts, we have something called the heat loan, which is 0% financing for energy efficiency improvements. So a homeowner, if they know about these incentives that are out there through the IRA or the Energize Connecticut incentives that are out there, you can really give your buyers some peace of mind that there's a way to approach this after they own the property, after the point of sale, in which you give them the resources so that they can get the job done the way it should be done, and to get ridiculous incentives out there to be able to take care of some of these problems that are readily apparent. I mean, hot water heaters, another great example. We know damn well when they're going to go, right? I mean, it's usually December 24th and the whole family's there, right? And you call the plumber in an emergency and they got whatever they've got in their truck and they put it in there. And there are so much better resource units out there. I mean, heat pump hot water heaters, fantastic. My home's a great use case for it. And if we plan a little bit ahead, if we help our past home buyers or our current friends that are homeowners that we want to be their listing agent for, there's great opportunities here to engage them on their equipment and when to replace it and have a plan for their replacement as well.
Exactly. And this chart is just showing kind of that same data, but comparing different regions. And what we're seeing, the takeaway should be clear. New England uses the largest amount of space heating, energy. The numbers here are in kBTUs per household. So New England homes on average use nearly 60 million BTUs per house for space heating, more than any other region. So when we look at things like passive house and other high performance building practices, they've taken off here more than they have in other parts of the country. And this is a large reason for that, because we need it here more than a lot of the other places do. So that's just kind of showing the background. So we're going to get into a little bit on now these high performance standards and rating systems, because the reality is there's a lot out there. I imagine everyone on this call is familiar with maybe LEED or Energy Star. There's other things that exist as standards and rating systems. And all these things try in their own way to improve buildings, improve homes, improve other buildings, and provide some type of standard to measure against, and then provide a way to certify that building and say, you meet this, we're going to award it. But they do that in different ways. I'm sure most folks are familiar with LEED, so I'll start off with that one. LEED has, has sort of a checklist of all these different things you can do during design and construction and sort of meet different requirements and become certified as LEED if you achieve a number of points. But those points cover a wide range of categories. They cover energy use, but they also cover how you're treating the site, how much water you're using, other kind of sustainability aspects of the building. So it becomes what we consider to be a holistic energy standard, or sorry, a holistic sustainability standard. It covers a lot of ground. Passive house and FEIS, which you see here in the middle, are the two passive house certifications. And what sets passive house apart from these other ones is that it focuses specifically on energy use. So rather than kind of trying to address other forms of sustainability, it really energy.
We're starting to lose you, Aaron, on your web connection here, I think.
So this is the HERS system. We kind of showed this already. I'm sorry? Can you hear me all right?
We're losing you a little bit in terms of your web connection.
Can you hear me all right? Or you
I
are
can right now, but it was very spotty.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. There might be some connection issues, folks. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. Apparently my connection's going in and out. I apologize here. I'm going to actually go here. So this was LEED, as I was explaining. They have a variety of different ways that you can earn points. And you'll notice in there, energy and atmosphere. But you'll also notice a whole lot of other things. What this means is that buildings that you see certified LEED might have low energy use. They also might not. They might do other things better than energy. So LEED can sort of be all over the map in terms of energy production. Passive house, and what kind of the reason why it's become a more now of a well-known standard and more widely used is because it focuses specifically on energy performance. It zeroes in. It sets criteria for annual heating and cooling demand. So how much energy are you using in the building to heat it? How much energy are you using to cool it? It also sets specific standards for whole building air tightness. So how airtight is that building envelope? We want to measure that and have a goal for what we want to achieve. And then it also sets standards for source energy demand. That's just sort of a way of talking about overall energy use of the building. So if we take heating and cooling demand and add every other source of energy in the building, we want to make sure that doesn't go over a certain limit as well. So this is sort of the timeline, just to give you an idea of where Passive House came from. It's not new. Passive House itself was formed in the middle of this timeline, where it says PHI is founded. PHI is Passive House Institute. It was the first organization in the world that certified buildings as a passive house building. So that was founded in the mid-90s. But it was based on ideas that had started to be implemented way back in the 70s with concepts around super insulated homes. And that worry of, well, homes need to breathe, that really came out of these original super insulated homes. Because in a lot of cases, these homes did not have the modern ventilation systems we use now. So they may have encountered problems with that lack of airflow concept. that we don't experience now. But the main ideas of Passive House came from that. The first use of Passive House in print was actually a home in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, so right here in New England. But then Passive House sort of, like I said, came around the mid-90s, started in Germany as a European standard, and then expanded here to the US in the 2000s.
I'm going to add one piece to this, if you can go back.
Yeah, please do.
So my wife and I have another home in Jaffrey, New Hampshire that was built in 1986. And it was built by an architect and a builder that understood passive solar design. Passive solar design and Passive House are very much related. So that bottom right picture looks a lot like my house in Jaffrey. Big south-facing windows that collect a lot of solar heat gain during the winter, but when the sun's higher in the sky, we don't get that heat gain coming in, right? So that in a very well-built envelope from 1986, they used 2x6 construction, which was way ahead of its time, well-insulated building on the inside and the outside, really cool home. So this stuff has been around in the marketplace for a while, but it's really, you know, the way Passive House has put this together in terms of a certification setup and to move the market is really impressive here.
So this is just showing you, once again, a comparison between LEED and Passive House. I like to focus a lot on that kind of comparison because I just find more people are familiar with LEED. It's been around for a while. But I also want to use this to emphasize that they're not competing standards. They're complementary. In fact, a lot of LEED projects utilize Passive House in order to achieve LEED certification, because Passive House can basically help them achieve all of the points they need in their energy and in their energy and atmosphere category, in their indoor environmental quality category. I'm sorry, excuse me, having a little trouble speaking at the moment. So Passive House and LEED can be very complementary to one another. And this is showing you FIAS specifically, which is one of the two Passive House certification platforms, FIAS and PHI. This is showing you how FIAS also incorporates other standards that already exist. So it incorporates the base building code, it incorporates Energy Star certification, it incorporates Zero Energy Ready Home certification. It also incorporates Water Sense, which is, I believe, an EPA program. So there's a few other sort of standards and things that exist out there that if you're, building a new home, you may need to take into account. Well, FIAS tries to incorporate all those things, so it's not competing with these other standards. It's not trying to cause confusion or complications. It's trying to build these other things you're required to do into the system. Make it easy. So I talked a lot about, what does Passive House do? Well, one of the things is the air tightness standard. Some of you, this might not mean anything to. If you don't understand what air changes per hour at 50 pascals of pressure are, that's okay. But if anyone, if this does mean something to you, you'll notice it's pretty dramatic. So generally, the base building code asks for around 3 ACH 50. So this is just a measure of how airtight that building is. So every building has to meet some type of air tightness. But 3 is not a very airtight building. It's simply it has some air tightness. Passive House requires that to go down to 0.6 ACH 50, which is a pretty dramatic improvement. You'll notice that's not completely airtight, but it's a pretty dramatic improvement.
And in the NAR Green designation, particularly, day one is really about building science, right? So we talk a lot about building door tests, we talk about the building envelope, framing, air sealing, insulation, ventilation. We've got all of that covered, but also testing the performance of the building, which is what's happening here with this blower door test, is really important. So we do introduce realtors to knowing the science, but day 2 is really about marketing these homes. And you'll see this in the later frame. We've got to know, it's good to know the science, but it's important to sell the benefits, right?
Exactly.
So we translate all of the stuff into benefits, which is clearly
I think the main benefit you'll experience here is that top line, third-party verified performance testing. These buildings are tested. We know how they perform because we measure it and test it. Other buildings don't have that. So that's one of the benefits you get from something like Passive House certification is you know what this building is going to achieve. And it's because somebody else tested it for us. I'm just going to show some performance comparisons. So this is energy use. These next few slides are just so we can all understand when we say a passive house uses less energy, what does that mean? So this is a multifamily passive house building in downtown Boston. This building uses, so the numbers we're looking at are something called EUI. That's just the total kBTUs of energy the building uses divided by the square footage of that building. So this building, which is called the Distillery, has a 24 EUI. The general kind of mid-rise construction in the Boston area, the average is 62. So this building uses 60% less energy than a comparable building does in this area. This is a project in New Hampshire. This was actually built in 3 phases as senior housing. The first phase we don't need to worry about. The second phase was built to LEED. It was built to achieve LEED standards. The third phase was built to achieve Passive House. And otherwise, they're similar. They're similar number of units, similar size, architectural features. They were designed pretty similarly, except the third phase went ahead and achieved Passive House. And that third phase uses 61% less energy than that LEED certified second phase. So pretty dramatic improvement just by going to Passive House. This is looking at data from Philadelphia. Again, I mentioned how Pennsylvania sort of initially was one of the first states to adopt a lot of Passive House incentives. So we have a lot of data from there. And this is just comparing Passive House projects to LEED projects to code built projects. And you can see the improvement, the average going from 58 to 47 down to 25 for the Passive House projects. But the other takeaway and why I really like this graph is you can see the variability of the code projects and even the variability of the LEED projects. Their energy performance is all over the map. You can have a good performing code built building. There's no requirement to do it, but it's possible. Just not enough people do that voluntarily. With Passive House, you're not going to have that variability because that performance is the requirement. You have to do it. So it's not a guess to say maybe this building will be 57%, better improvement. No, we know it's going to be.
And that verification piece of this is important in the marketplace too, Aaron, because every realtor, we all know this, right? Every builder, if you ask them, built the best homes in the face of humanity. But we really don't know that unless it's verified. And I think the third-party verification part of this, the performance testing, is something that in doing open houses, we can make buyers aware that this is third-party verified. And there's some real value to that, compared to the typical builder out there.
Exactly. That verification is so critical. And it allows us to hopefully, start to include data like this in the MLS and other resources so people can actually see this data that's been third-party verified. This is showing you 3 different smaller projects. So these are all Massachusetts projects. The one on the bottom is that house in Wayland that we talked about. The one on the top is just a net zero passive house in Lincoln, kind of a farmhouse style. And the one in the middle is actually an office building. It's a single-story office building in Newton called the Studio. So you can see how these buildings perform. And one thing I will note is the EUI in this case is without solar being into account. You can see the solar panels on the farmhouse and on that office building. So right now we're not accounting for those. If we were to account for the solar, the EUI of those buildings would be 0 or negative something, because both of those buildings are net 0 and potentially net positive depending on the amount of production. But not even taking the solar into account, you can see how much dramatic improvement in EUI. So pretty impressive data there. So that was all about energy performance. And that really is, I think, the core of these standards of passive house and high performance buildings is reducing energy demand of buildings. But that's not the only reason to do it. And that's not the only benefit that we see. There's many other benefits. So one I'm going to talk about now is the concept of durability and resilience. There's lots of different aspects to this, but here's a few of them. One, it means you can shelter in place. We've all either experienced or have heard about other people experiencing power outages during extreme temperature conditions. Maybe it's in the middle of winter and it's really cold outside and your power goes out. Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's a really hot day in the summer and your power goes out and you can't, use your AC or anything else. So sheltering in place means, can we withstand those conditions until they improve, until they're fixed? These buildings are much better at doing that. I'll show you an example in one moment. We also mean these buildings are more durable and longer lasting. They're being built with better materials and better attention to detail. They're going to resist things like mold and rot and pests and water intrusion and all of these things that can cause problems to buildings. They're going to just experience fewer instances of this dramatically. I'm just going to go ahead to the story here because I do just want to tell this. This is that shelter in place story. This is a house that was in Texas. This house was actually an existing home that was renovated into a passive house. So passive house is not just new buildings. You can renovate and continue and be certified as a passive house, and that's what this one did. They renovated their home in 2020. Maybe they had a premonition here, but they knew 2021 a deep freeze happened in Texas. Similar things are expected to happen this coming winter and even this summer, unfortunately, in Texas. But they experienced a power outage during this deep freeze. So the power went out around 1 a.m. When they woke up in the morning, it was, what does this say here? 9 degrees outside. That was the outside temperature. Their home was 62 degrees. Their heating system had not been working since 1 a.m., but their home was still 62 degrees. Their neighbor's house, not a passive house, was already down to 36 degrees. And the power continued to be out for a while after this. Those neighbors were not able to stay in their home. That was not a comfortable living condition, but the passive house allowed these folks to withstand the duration of that power outage in a comfortable enough conditions. And this is what we mean by sheltering in place. And we see similar stuff up here in Massachusetts. Last summer, we had power outages on really hot days in summer. No AC systems were working. Homes were becoming very uncomfortable very quickly, but passive houses were not. They were staying at a comfortable enough temperature.
Those poor people in Texas too that weren't used to this probably didn't know that they had to drain their water lines so that their pipes wouldn't freeze as well, right? So I mean, very tangible reasons why.
A lot of added costs because of that. Exactly, a lot of kind of these other effects that can happen. So when we talk about sheltering in place and these other kind of benefits, this is a big one. The other one is we kind of bucket these together into, occupant quality or occupant comfort and health. It means a lot of different things, but the main one is better indoor air quality. So we have ventilation systems that are filtering air, that are providing fresh filtered air into this building and that are exhausting dirty air. Simple as that, we're getting better air quality in these buildings. I think this is, due to COVID over the last several years, it's become a greater talking point. And maybe that's why we hear people bringing it up more. But the reality is this is becoming a larger driver of why people choose a passive house, because they want a more comfortable building to live in, or they want better air quality, or perhaps they have a child with asthma or other conditions where they need this. And this really makes a huge benefit to their quality of life, having a building that is going to have better air quality.
And we don't have any metrics at this point in time for the appraisal industry to value air quality, right? So I just want to make that clear from an appraisal perspective. This doesn't get the same kind of value as the lower operating cost for a home does. But I will say from a buyer's perspective, again, when we convert the science to benefits, air quality, health, and comfort, I mean, one of the things I ask my buyers, in our initial consultation is get all the information that they want, size of the home, communities they want to live in, school system that they want to be near, number of parking spots that they need, all the average stuff. And at the end of that, Aaron, I asked, just for the fun of it, when you guys were growing up or going through college, you know, renting a triple decker over in Alston Brighton, what were some of the things that you hated about some of your past homes? And inevitably things like, oh, I can't stand oil, heat, air. That pops up all the time. Or, you know, there was always one room that was wicked cold in the winter and wicked hot in the summer, right? These are tangible benefits, definitely, even though we don't have a way to qualify this in a monetary perspective from an appraisal perspective, but buyers do care about this stuff, definitely.
Mm-hmm. And something else so every once in a while I go and tour some of these buildings and talk to the owners or the tenants in the case of rentals who are living in them, and it never fails. They always mention how quiet it is. Yeah. It's never a benefit that I think of why somebody chooses passive house, but everyone living in one mentions that that's a benefit to them is how quiet it is. So that's also one. Don't forget to mention. There are other incentives out there. Craig, I'll let you talk about this one here.
Yeah, so this is fortunately inaccurate now, thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act. So the tax incentive was set to expire in 2022, but the Biden administration passed an extension of the investment tax credit so that homeowners could take a 30% tax credit off from the installed price of the solar PV system. So if you're a realtor out there, right, you installed solar panels on your rooftop, it cost you $20,000, you can take off in your next tax year 30% of that, or $6,000 off from what you owe the federal government. Really, and that's just one example of some of the tax incentives that are out there. Again, you know, a good quick look at this stuff is Google Rewiring America IRA calculators. So they have an Inflation Reduction Act calculator on this website, Rewiring America, that you put in just 5 inputs. You don't have to put in your email address or anything, and it will spit out to you very quickly what the tax incentives look like for your income bracket. Obviously, check with your tax advisor before moving forward with any of this stuff, and just make sure that your tax advisor is giving you the same information. But there's very powerful incentives that are out there for all of us to be able to take advantage of. And if you as a realtor take advantage of it, then you've got a great story to tell your future buyers and homeowners as you move forward.
All right, we're going to actually kind of go more in depth now on high performance homes and passive house, talk a little bit about how they are different than other buildings. We talked about how they perform and cost and all this background data. But I do want to pause and just make sure we're getting questions answered. I do see one in the chat. Craig, I think this was about the home that you were talking about that was net positive and that paid for their EV as well. They're just asking how large the system was and some details about the solar.
It's about the solar system. So if I remember correctly, it was an 11 kW solar PV system in a home that's a little bit over 2,000 square feet, might be about 2,100, 2,200 square feet. I don't have the exact data in front of me, but you know, again, built to high performance standards. So as Aaron said, you know, we can right size these HVAC systems, and you know, first of all, air source heat pumps are 300% efficient. So for every kilowatt that they use to power the pump, it's producing 3 units of energy for each kilowatt that's used. I mean, it's just amazing technology that's out there. And heat pump water systems, the same thing. So I think, if I remember correctly, those were the sizes, Aaron, for that.
Okay. No, that's great. Oh, they're asking now, did that have RECs that lowered the cost? Was that part of the calculation?
This was built, yes, prior to the end of 2018. So they had, yeah, that's not included in the $434, but that's a great point. The end of, I think it was November 2018 is when the Massachusetts SREC program ended, that powerful incentive that was out there. And this was built before that point. So they are being able to take advantage of those incentives as well.
Okay, good to know. Those are all the questions I see. So folks, continue to ask questions if you have them. We definitely want to address what you are curious about as we go through this. So I'm going to start with this section now and just talk a little bit more about high performance homes. So I mentioned before what is a high performance home, how we're kind of going to try to define it. Oh, sorry, let me actually get some more stuff here. So what we're talking about is a home that uses less energy than a conventional home, produces fewer carbon emissions, and provides a higher level of air quality, comfort, occupant health, and has greater durability and resilience. You're seeing two examples on the right, but that's generally what we mean when we say high performance, are these various things. Within that, we have standards like passive house, which can actually define it much more critically, but in general, this is what we mean when we say a high performance home. So what's wrong with conventional homes? They leak. That's the biggest problem with them. We can say there's lots of other things, but hot air rises, escapes through the roof, escapes through upper story windows and other places. It draws cold air in through other leaks in the basement and other places. Heat also conducts outward through materials with low thermal resistance. So through places in your wall where you may not have insulation, you may not have adequate insulation, you can have heat escaping that way as well. So there's lots of ways for heat to escape homes. What this means is in order to be comfortable, we have to constantly be producing a source of heat. Again, this is a winter situation that I'm talking about here, but we have to constantly be producing more and more heat because our homes are very, very bad at keeping that heat in. But this can also cause other problems. Ice dams, folks might be very familiar with. That happens when heat is rising through that roof. It's not able to stay in the home. It rises up. It melts some snow. That snow goes down to the cold eaves of the home where it freezes and you get an ice dam. We can also get mold growth. So a lot of times people look at a wall and they see maybe mold growth on it or some type of water issue, and their immediate thought is there's a pipe that's leaking. There's some sort of water getting into here. That may be the case, but it's not the only way this can happen. This is an example of mold growth from thermal bridging. Thermal bridging is a place where you might have material in the wall, your wood studs or otherwise, that aren't properly insulated, and heat transfers through them. And you might end up with a very cold spot on your wall because of that, and that can lead to mold growth. So these homes, passive house, high performance homes, we also try to eliminate this problem of thermal bridging through the wall. So we're leaking energy, we're leaking money. How do we solve this? We solve this by building a better home, a high performance home. Simple as that. So what are the principles behind a high performance home? Number one, use the building envelope to create a thermal barrier and air barrier. This reduces heat loss in winter, and it reduces air movement outside of the building, from the inside to the outside. So primarily this is through an air barrier and through some type of heat barrier. So the air barrier, there's lots of different types of air barriers. What we're looking at here is just one example of a wall that is showing you an air barrier membrane that's put over the sheathing. So they might have, OSB sheeting on this wall. They're going to put an air barrier membrane over the top of that, which is going to help reduce air movement through the wall. We also then have a heat barrier or a thermal barrier. This can be done through dense packed insulation in the cavities. So dense packed cellulose insulation or dense packed fiberglass in those cavities. But that's not enough. We also want a continuous layer outside of those cavities that's going all around the building. This is called a continuous exterior insulation. This can be different things. This might be some foam boards. There's other products like mineral wool. There's now wood fiber boards that can go up. There's different things you can use for this, but we want that continuous barrier around as well. So this is how we use the building envelope. And just to clarify, these photos are kind of showing wall sections, but we're talking about this around the whole building. So these practices are put into place around the roof of the building, around the bottom of the building, around the floor, the basement, wherever you have the floor. We're wrapping the whole building in these type of things. So that's the first principle, using the building envelope to create a thermal barrier and air barrier. The second principle is using efficient heating and cooling equipment. So efficient mechanical equipment to produce the heating, the energy we do need. And we'll talk a little bit more about these specific systems in a moment. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that right now. But we use the building envelope in order to trap heat in that we produce. And then the heat that we do need, we produce through very efficient methods. buildings. The third principle is the ventilation system. So this is that lungs of the building. This is how it breathes. So these systems are incredibly important. And we will talk a little bit more about this on a future slide as well. But what you're seeing in the photo is something called an energy recovery ventilator. So we'll dive more into that in a little bit. But it's good to know that this is a critically important part of high performance buildings and passive house buildings. The effect, the impact is going to be this. So this is a picture of some row houses. This is actually in Brooklyn, of all places, but they renovated one of these row houses into a passive house. Here's a thermal image, helps you figure out which one it is. So what you're seeing here is heat escaping all of these buildings. That's the red, orange, yellow, green colors. That's heat escaping. The one in the middle there, that's all blue, that's the passive house. And this is what a passive house looks like under that thermal image. We are trapping the heat inside the building. You can see a few leaks around the edges of some of those windows and doors, but very minor compared to the other buildings. Otherwise, we're not seeing any heat escape there. And that's what a passive house should look like. We throw the blanket around the building, we throw the sweater on, we keep it all in.
Can you just go back to that last image for a second?
Yeah, of course.
Because what I see in that house to the left of the passive house certified unit is, you know, probably somebody that's invested in some windows to improve the performance of the windows, but there's clearly no insulation there, right? So, you know, insulation and air sealing is the low-hanging fruit, the most cost-effective thing that you can do. Having better performing windows is great. I mean, that helps sell a property, but obviously, you know, dealing with the air leakage in the building envelope is really, really critical.
Yes, that's an excellent point to make here. We see a lot of folks, especially in renovations, you know, prioritizing new windows, which, you know, have lots of other benefits, of course. But in terms of heat loss, yeah, getting insulation, getting air sealing into the walls, into the cavities, that's a primary focus, or should be. So I just want to do a few more. This is not meant to, you know, teach you how to build one of these buildings, but it's just meant to give you an idea of what we're talking about. This is actually a multifamily building. It's that distillery project that's in Boston. But it's just meant to give you a visualization of what we mean by this building envelope. So they started by using advanced framing techniques. That's just a fancy way of saying they created more space for insulation in the walls, and tried to reduce the amount of extraneous lumber, extraneous wood headers and things that just weren't needed in a project. A lot of times traditional projects just go overboard on framing. They put in extra kind of things that aren't really needed. So we start by eliminating the things that aren't needed. And then we put sheathing over the top of this. This is actually using something very on the top there. It's something I'm sure you guys have all seen as you've driven around and see projects under construction. This green sheathing material that's going up called zip system. It's used in a wide variety of projects, not just passive house projects. But what it is a sheathing material. So it's like an OSB sheathing with a dedicated air barrier membrane already on it. So if it's attached, so if it's installed properly, if all the seams are taped and everything else is sort of done properly on it, it's going to work as a dedicated air barrier. So a lot of those projects you may see going around with this green sheathing on them, that's what they're using. There's other types of air barrier systems, but that's one of the popular ones. On top of that green zip system, the brown material that you see is mineral wool. In this case, that is a 3-inch thick mineral wool board that's being put up on there and attached, and that's acting as the continuous layer of insulation around the building. So we have our air barrier going around the building, and now we have a continuous thermal barrier going around the building. Here's a single family home. This is actually that house in Wayland. So this home used just a traditional sheathing material, just like a regular OSB boards, not zip system. And then for their air barrier, they use this blue material, which is a membrane system that they just attach on top of the OSB. And it works the same way. As long as it's installed right, it's taped properly, it works as a dedicated air barrier. So they wrap their house in this air barrier system. And then on top of that, they use mineral wool as well on top of that one. So they use a very similar insulation system. Here's just some principles on air tightness that we try to kind of emphasize just to kind of get an idea. Air tightness comes from having that membrane around the building that makes it airtight, but it also comes from having proper installation methods and construction methods to make sure it's installed properly, because we don't want any gaps in that air barrier. And the reality is we put lots of holes through our walls through construction. We put things going through our walls. We put fasteners through the wall. We put plumbing and electrical systems through the walls. So what we want to do is just make sure that those things are being installed properly, that they're being taped and sealed. So a lot of the, going back to kind of the earlier conversation about the importance of the trades in this are these details. This is nothing new for the trades who are doing this, but it's just a more, I would say more, a greater attention to detail. It matters more. On a traditional project, having a little gap in the air barrier might not matter. Or having a hole that goes through the sheathing might not matter. But in a passive house or a high performance building, it matters. So they just need to make sure that this is done right and everything's doing its job. Here's just some more examples of the air sealing around windows, air sealing around plumbing penetrations, around electrical outlets. So it's just attention to detail on a lot of these different places that makes a difference between a leaky home and a well insulated and sealed home.
And I still see in the marketplace, Aaron, driving around Massachusetts, you see builders that are building and they're using tie-back. Nothing against tie-back, it can be very useful, but the subs are stapling them to the OSB, and then a big wind comes up and they're flapping all over the place. And you just wonder, what the attention to detail is here.
Right. That's exactly the kind of situation we want to avoid. We don't want too many staples going through that fabric. And we also want it applied tight. We don't want air blowing it around, because that means it's going to be applied loosely. We want it tight and flat against the whole thing. So yeah, that attention to that detail becomes critical. This is a short thing on the concept of thermal bridging. I mentioned it already, but this is just kind of give you an idea of what we mean. So the image here should help. This is just, we're on the inside of a home with a thermal camera looking at an exterior wall, and you can see the wood studs. That is showing you heat transferring through those wood studs. So if you have your home heated up on a cold winter day and your house is warm, and you have your cavities filled with insulation, you did insulation, you had them dense packed with cellulose, you did that. You're not going to have as much heat escaping through those cavities, but you are going to have heat escaping through those wood studs. And that's what we see in this photo. You can even see the fasteners. Whether those are screws or nails, there's some type of fastener, and you're seeing the heat go right through that metal as well. So this is something we want to avoid in high performance building. So sometimes we can eliminate thermal bridges. There's some places where maybe we don't need these wood studs to be as close together as they are. We can spread them out farther. We can go 26 inches on center compared to 16 inches on center. Now what that means is we have fewer wood studs in the wall, fewer places for thermal bridges. Sometimes we can introduce materials that are called thermal breaks that can go in between, maybe where a balcony sticks out or something. We can try to break some of the thermal conductivity of the material. There's different methods that are used. But the point is, in these projects, we pay attention to thermal bridging, and we just try to look for ways that we can mitigate its impact.
One pro tip for realtors out there, a great time to show a home is after you've had an inch of snow, because if you look at the rafters, this is kind of the opposite of thermal bridging. But if you go out and show homes in a neighborhood in Massachusetts, Connecticut, whatever, after an inch of snow and it's still below freezing, in some homes you'll see that there's still snow where the rafters are, but there's no snow in between. And 99% of the time, that's going to be a good indicator is that there's no insulation in the roof. And the only thing protecting the heat in the roof is the actual 8-inch rafters that are there. So there's just lots of different ways that you can use this information in informing clients about energy performance.
Yeah, and this is just showing you one of the benefits of that continuous insulation layer on the outside of the frame. It can help reduce the impact of those thermal bridges. So you can see on the left, this is before that. In this case, it was mineral wool on this building, but before the mineral wool was applied on the outside, and you can see the heat going through the studs. After the mineral wool is applied, and you can see the dramatic reduction. So that's one of the reasons for continuous insulation on the outside. is to reduce the impact of the thermal bridges that are there. So I want to transition now into heating and cooling and talk more about the systems that we use. So if you remember kind of the principles I talked about, you can even, even make it even clearer to just say there's two principles to a passive house. One, we're going to trap the heat in, and two, we're going to produce the heat in a very efficient way. If you want to boil it down to the most simple methods, that would be it. So now we're going to talk about the heat and the cooling that we do need. How do we produce it? So the most common method is through air source heat pumps. In larger buildings, you might see something called a VRF, which is just a variable refrigerant flow, but it in practice is basically a version of a heat pump that's just made for larger buildings. What these things are incredible, and I'm sure you have all seen these. They're used on a wide variety of projects. A lot of retrofits of existing homes will replace their heating system with these. I wish more would. But they're incredible. They provide both. So just a few big key takeaways. They provide both heating and cooling. So they accomplish both of those goals. They do that through electricity. So they work on electricity, not gas or any other fuel. The other kind of main takeaway I would say about these is that third bullet point. They operate at 200 to 400% efficiency. Just kind of a quick background to give you guys an idea of how that works. So your natural gas boiler uses gas to produce heat. It burns that gas heats up the air. These systems use electricity to power a compressor. And that compressor compresses air, which extracts the heat energy out of that air and transfers it to some coolant, similar to, say, what you might have from your refrigerator. Your refrigerator is cooling the inside of your fridge. If you ever felt the back of it, it's going to be really warm because it's taking all that heat out. Well, this is doing a similar thing. It's compressing all that air, extracting the heat energy out of it, and then transferring that heat energy into your interior air. Because the electricity isn't directly generating heat, it's just powering that compressor, we're able to operate at greater than 100% efficiency, 200 to 400% efficiency. So incredible systems. Also, that last bullet point, just to mention, you've probably all heard cases, especially here in New England, about older systems that just did not do well in our cold winters. That is true of older systems. We're past that point now. The newer models are all cold temperature models that do fine in the weather that we get here in New England. So this is a little bit more about the ventilation system. So what you're going to see is different terminology. You'll see phrases like HRV and ERV. What these mean is heat recovery ventilator or energy recovery ventilator. You'll see these used interchangeably a lot, and effectively they're the same thing. There's just some minor differences. So the main difference is that the ERVs, the energy recovery ventilators, do a better job of dealing with latent heat or humidity. So in our climate zone here in New England, we tend to use ERVs rather than HRVs just for that reason. But in terms of the operation of these units, they're the same. So a few kind of key takeaways from ERVs. These are a balanced ventilation system, meaning the supply and exhaust air is equal in volume. So the air that we take out of the building is equal to the volume of air we bring into the building. We're not mixing that air together at all. That air is staying separate, so the supply air and exhaust air is never mixing. This system is always operating, so it's continuously running at all times. It's not cycling on or off throughout the day. It may have variable fan speeds, so you may have different speeds at which it might be transferring air, but we do have these systems. They're designed to always be operating. And they're providing fresh supply air passed through an air filter. So when we talk about indoor air quality, this is a really, really key reason why. It's because we're taking, not only are we exhausting all that dirty air and getting it out of the building, but the air that we're bringing in is going through filters. And I know for a lot of folks, details on filters you might not know about them, but for folks who do, if you know about, say, MERV ratings, that's one of the ways that we measure air filter quality is MERV, MERV. These systems tend to have a MERV 12 or higher put into them by default. So if that means something to you, you should know that that's a high quality rating of an air filter. So the main, and just kind of the background of how these work is that middle kind of a square that's, at a diamond kind of shape here in the image, that's called a heat exchanger. So while we're not mixing the air, we are passing the supply exhaust air through this heat exchanger. And that heat exchanger extracts some heat energy from the air. That's a reason we call this a recovery ventilator, because it recovers some of the outgoing energy, some of the heat energy. So on a winter day, when you're extracting warm air from your home and bringing in cold air, you're able to extract some of that warm heat energy from the outgoing air and put it into the incoming air without mixing the air itself. So pretty incredible systems. A note on windows. So we're not going to spend time talking about them. We do obviously use better quality windows in these projects. I see a lot of triple pane windows. I also do see double pane windows being able to be used. When you do a project like a passive house, for example, this will be sort of studied and this will be modeled, and you'll figure out what kind of window you need for your building. But there's different varieties that are available. The key, though, I would say, is that they have thermal breaks and insulated frames. So probably even more important than the amount of glass that you might have is how is the frame designed. So that's kind of I think the key difference between the type of windows we use in these projects and traditional windows is that we're making sure the frame is built more with insulation and thermal breaks, so the frame isn't transferring as much heat. Also, the big bullet point on the top, windows are still operable, just as a thing. You might have people asking, well, can I open the windows? Of course, you can open the windows in these buildings.
And one of the bits that we're seeing in just manufacturing in the United States, a decade ago or less than a decade ago, builders only had an option to go to Poland or Germany to get these fancy triple pane windows. Now we're seeing U.S. manufacturers, Marvin. There's a manufacturer I'm spacing out on the name right now that's really devoted. So we're seeing U.S. manufacturers pick up this part of the ball because they're seeing that there's a there in this part of the marketplace. So we use the Anderson 400 windows, double pane windows for our house. This is kind of 50 shades of green here. We're talking about the 50th shade, but these are good performing windows for double pane windows for what we wanted to do with our home to make it a better performing home.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Windows used to be a much larger concern for these type of buildings, years ago, when it was harder to find high quality windows. But at this point, presentations like this, I can just go to one slide of a note on windows because it's much more common to find these. And I mean, we're seeing, homes that are renovated that are using the same type of windows that we're using on passive house projects. So we're going to go through some quick case studies here. We're approaching about 20 minutes left of the presentation. Continue to ask questions. I haven't seen any new ones come in. Oh, sorry, I do see. I have a hard time seeing the questions here. I apologize. So ERVs require a lot of space, especially in retrofits. So no, ERVs don't require a lot of space. That kind of ERV system will usually be installed in like a closet. Let me go back 2 slides here. So this is an example on the right of an ERV that would be in, a small like utility closet type space. And for a single family home, you're going to have one of those. In a single family home, you're going to have one of those systems in a closet somewhere. And then you're going to have air ducts going through your house. So you will have some air ducts. But otherwise, they don't take much space at all.
And this one's a Zender unit, which is kind of the leader in the marketplace. But we're, again, that German company, I believe, but we're seeing U.S. manufacturers, pick up the ball here with the ERVs as well.
All right. I just want to make sure I got all the questions here. And I think that's it here. So I'm going to go ahead. All right. So case studies. We're going to go through a few of these really quick, but this is just kind of show you a few projects. And the idea here was to show you some that have been on the market and kind of what to look through. So this is one. This is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. This looks like it was built to be an old, look like a Victorian house that belonged right on the street in Cambridge. But this is all new construction. And this was built to sell. So this was built by the owner who built it with the intention of selling it on the market once it was constructed. So North Cambridge, it was completed in 2021, single family building, and it is a certified passive house and it's all electric. So every system in this building is electric. It was designed to be net zero with on-site PV that was installed on the roof. So the idea was after a year, it would be net zero. It also had an EV charger installed on the driveway. And that was, again, intended to be powered by the solar panels in the house. So here you can see some construction going on. This was built using something called panelized prefabricated construction. And this is something we're seeing more and more of in the passive house space. You can see down on the bottom of this image on the flatbed truck are panels that were built in a factory. Wall panels and floor panels and ceiling panels were all built in a factory, and they were delivered to site and then constructed on site. This entire home, not counting the foundation work, but the actual construction of the walls and roof was done in 10 days on site. Because all they did is deliver these panels there and assemble them like Legos. Incredible method to reduce on-site construction time and to ensure some quality control, because everything was built and tested in a factory before it was delivered there. Pretty incredible. Here's a little bit about the foundation going up. So they did this is a common foundation we see in passive houses where it's insulated concrete. So you're seeing the insulation materials there, and then the concrete foundation will be poured into the middle of that. They used air source heat pumps. So you're seeing one of the images from the inside of the house. There's the heat pump compressors on the outside of the house, hidden by some bushes. They use an ERV. So this is the ERV that was in their attic, is actually where they have theirs installed. So I showed the one that might be in like a closet. You can have a lot of these installed. I've seen them in attics. I've seen them in basements. You can put these in different places. But theirs was installed in an attic, and they had MERV 13 filter in theirs. They also use a hybrid
attic. It was inside the building.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for that clarification. Yes, that was inside the envelope of the building. So the insulation and everything was done at the roof level. The attic was part of the conditioned space. So it was also used as a storage room as well as a utility room. Hybrid electric water heater. So they use actually a heat pump water heater, which we're starting to see more and more of, especially in single family homes. For all electric water heating is a heat pump for water heating. Insulated pipes, a variety of things there, rooftop solar panel, and EV in the driveway. But here's how it was marketed. So it was marketed as a passive house and a net zero house. That was front and center in the marketing. And they was on the market for a week and sold for over asking. And they did not shy about this being passive house or net zero. So this is now that was recent. This was a couple of years ago. This one goes back a much longer ways. This is in Roxbury, right in downtown Boston. This is one of the first certified passive house buildings built in Boston. Completed in 2014. It was done by an architect builder, so a design build firm, Place Taylor. You can see the building here. We'll send out these slides, so I'm not going to read through all of this stuff about it. But it was built to be a passive house, also built to have solar panels put on it. It was sold in 2014 for just over $500,000 initially, and then those owners resold it in 2019 for $815,000. So first $740,000 asking, so over asking, resold it, and both times, both when it was initially put on the market and when it was resold, it was marketed as a passive house, energy efficient home. In fact, you're seeing this italicized words here was used in the marketing for selling. So again, the fact that this was a passive house was front and center. Here's going back some newer projects. These were just finished in West Roxbury, three different single family buildings built next to each other. Here's some folks telling you these people bought one of the units. The reason they paid $1.4 million for this 2,500 square foot home was the technology. The technology they're referring to is the heat pump and ventilation system. The winter it got freezing, we were in our shorts inside the house. That's why they bought it. So it wasn't maybe the energy efficiency of the technology, but really what they were getting at, and there's an interview in the Wall Street Journal where they get a little bit more at this, but it was the comfort of the building. So when I talked earlier about, it's not just the energy performance that is the marketing of these buildings, the comfort of them, the quality of life in them That's what got these people to buy this house. The summer, the house remained at 72 to 75 degrees with only a few hours of air conditioning each day. Their electricity bill has a negative balance of $1,000, meaning the electricity company owes them. That's because of solar production as well, but incredible. All three of these homes sold before they were completed. And again, all three of them were marketed as energy efficient, passive house buildings. And they sold so quickly. These are not ones that were made for sale, but I just wanted to show two quick examples of different types of buildings, just so we can widen the scope of passive house. This is an old school building in East Haven that was retrofitted into senior housing. Incredible project, certified passive house retrofitted from high school into senior housing, right there in Connecticut. And here's a new building. I don't have a lot more information on this one, sorry, but this is in New Haven. This is a hotel, the first certified passive house hotel in the country is right in New Haven. You can go stay in it now. If you want to experience the comfort of a passive house, rent a room for a night. This is
I
incredible
stayed
project.
there last year, Aaron, in that hotel.
You did?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Oh, and I just pulled this up as well. I wanted to kind of dig into the past and see, like, is it what? Because I am less familiar with Connecticut than Massachusetts, I will admit. So I had to kind of dig to kind of see, like, how long has this been happening? Here you go. This is an article from 2015 about 2 passive house properties for sale in Stamford. This isn't new. This was a thing that happened 2015 now. How many years ago? 9 years at this point. So passive house projects have been around for a while. They've been advertised as passive house projects for a while. These projects sold. There were 2 of them. So they're there. They exist. Sorry, I went through that kind of quick because I wanted to make sure we got to this last section before we ran out of time. But again, if folks have questions, please ask them. And Craig, I'll let you kind of go ahead here, and I'll look at the chat room and make sure I haven't missed anything.
Yeah. So we've mentioned this before. In fact, we've kind of hit on several of the topics that we're going to hit, so I'm going to just re-hit these pretty quickly. But part of what we do with the green designation, with National Association of Realtors Green Designation, it's a full 2-day class where we do a deep dive on the building science, primarily in day 1. Day 2 is about marketing these homes effectively, valuing the homes effectively, and then how to use the information that you got from the green designation to turn it into business as the 3rd module. But this is a mantra that we hit over and over and over again. It is good to know the science. You don't have to be a building scientist PhD level. You got a builder, you got a HERS rater that can answer some of those questions. But you do need to have a basic understanding of the building science, which is what Aaron did such a great job describing to you at. But really what we sell is the benefit for these homes, right? So know the science, sell the benefit. You're gonna get asked questions from some engineer that wants to know everything about the building science. So you should have a working knowledge of how this works. And I found personally, Aaron, that when I've been involved in projects, I've had the opportunity to be involved in a couple of projects that have started where I've been the listing agent from the ground up. So I got to watch and be part of the team, the architectural design build team, went to every meeting for these meetings to understand the science behind this stuff. That's a huge benefit. I mean, compare that to some realtor that you hire at the last second that didn't get a chance to go through that process. And the buyer's going to ask questions about why did the builder make this choice, you know, with their eyes rolling about one specific thing. And if you've been there from the beginning, you can actually give an intelligent answer to those types of questions rather than just saying, yeah, I don't know why he did that, you know. So you got to know the science. We sell the benefits. So go ahead and move forward with the next slide, Aaron. Go back one, actually, because that's a good one. Yeah, so healthy homes are definitely part of this movement and one of the benefits. You know, I can guarantee you I'm going to have, you know, a family with asthma come through an open house when I'm listing a high performance home. And this image that the air a child breathes is as important as the food that they eat, is a very compelling image to families out there that, are more and more worried about indoor air pollution. We're seeing more and more evidence about even natural gas cooktops, and the impact that they're having on air pollution inside the building. So there are buyers out there, believe me, that are very, very concerned about these issues. And you need to know when those buyers show up, the healthy home part of this, understanding how the ERV works, is a really important selling point. Next one. Durable homes is obviously a huge benefit. This is a LEED, I think this is LEED Platinum certified development in that hurricane that came through the Gulf Coast several years ago. You can see it's the one that's left standing. These homes are meant, they're just built better. I mean, there's no question about it, and again, every builder thinks they built the greatest home humanity's ever seen. The important part of this is when you have these verified homes, these third-party verified homes, I think that's a real selling point in terms of the value proposition that we're gifting to buyers that are buying these homes. Resiliency, durability is a really hot topic right now, and it's only going to become a hotter topic as we continue through the rest of this decade, and temperatures continue to increase, more extreme weather events happening throughout the United States, whether it's wildfires, tornadoes, hailstorms, obviously hurricanes. It's going to be a big hurricane season, and extreme heat as well, which is becoming a huge issue if you're in Phoenix, Arizona, for instance, right? So durability for these homes is a really critical selling point. Next one. Resilience, same kind of thing. Resilient buildings, durable buildings mean the same thing, right? And Aaron gave a great example in Texas with that. Comfort, like I said before, I'll ask my buyers at the end of the intro session that we have, what were some of the things that you hated about some of that past homes that you lived in? And invariably, I will get, oh, you know what? The home I grew up with, or the home that I rented when I was in college, there was always one room that was wicked cold in the winter and wicked hot in the summer. Right? We can solve that problem with a better building envelope right now. And that's a fairly common problem that's out there, in existing homes today. That's very solvable. We can deal with the comfort issues with better building envelopes, and that even includes existing homes, right? So just going to Mass Save and having an energy assessment, letting them do some of the basic stuff with air sealing, and perhaps getting an insulation upgrade, we can certainly get this done cost effectively these days. Next slide. Yeah, peace and quiet, this is a really important one. So, that development that I was talking about earlier, Aaron, those 4 condos in the Fort Hill section of Roxbury, sold in 2017. The last one to sell, which is pretty common, Aaron, in our business, was the one that was nearest the street, right? Because people are worried about the sound of cars going by, right? And so, as was typical, this was the last one to sell, but I ended up getting 2 offers on it, and both of the buyer's agents remarked about how quiet it was when they submitted their offers. I'm on Main Street in Melrose right now. You can find my home in the Green Building Registry. It used to be so loud where I'm right on Main Street. My tour overlooks Main Street, and it used to be so loud that I couldn't conduct a webinar in this house the way it used to be before the renovation happened, and now I can. It's so quiet, so comfortable in here. It's really, it's a remarkable difference. Next slide. Yeah, and so here's the question, right? How do we take this to the bank, right? And really that comes from lower operating costs. Qualified appraisers that have gone through the Appraisal Institute's Valuation of Sustainable Buildings program can really add a number. It's not just about comps anymore. There are opportunities using things like net present value approach or an income approach. So those homes with solar PV on them, they're actually producing income for the homeowner in terms of lower operating costs. And a qualified appraiser, an appraiser that's gone through the Valuation of Sustainable Buildings program, can actually put a dollar number on that, right, to add to the contributory value of the comps. So let's say I comped out something that's worth $500,000. It's got a host-owned solar PV system with 20 years of remaining life in it. That might be $25,000 of additional contributory value that could save a home in a low appraisal. It could save a transaction. So this stuff is real. It's in the market. It's being implemented in the marketplace. It's to your benefit to really understand how this stuff works. Next slide. So again, here's a good, and Aaron said he'll send out the slides, but this is a good example of some of the benefits that we see out there. Resale value, the best of breed. These are kind of cool homes. I do tours in my house now for realtors that are interested in decarbonization, and people just find the whole thing cool. It's a good home. Our architect did a great job. I think we picked some great finishes, but it's just cool to be in these homes and experience. There's a kind of cool factor in all of this stuff as well. The tax benefits, the resale value, if you've hired a knowledgeable and competent realtor. Article 11 of the Code of Ethics, I might go into that if we've got some time. I doubt I will, but keep on going. Next slide. Yeah, and we're seeing a variety of different benefits, in terms of resale value. That property, those 4 condos that I sold in Fort Hill, was a really interesting use case. So we were competing with new construction down the street that was built to code, which Massachusetts, Boston was, has always been a leader in the code. And they were listed in 2017 for what a buyer's agent might expect the correct price to be for new construction, which was $375 a square foot. So when the developer and I put the condos, those 4 units in Fort Hill on the market, we listed it at $450 a square foot. And I was confident, you can never be sure with appraisers, but I was confident if I demanded a qualified appraiser, the appraiser would see that value of $450 a square foot. But with the buyers, right? We've got new construction with garages down the street. We didn't have any garages, listed at $375 a square foot. We sold all 4 of our units before 2 of the 7 down the street had sold. So you can't tell me that buyers, if you've got an agent, and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but if you're confident in this part of the business and you're not threatened by buyers' questions about how solar PV works, so, and you're somewhat fluent in this language, and it makes everybody feel more comfortable in the transaction. And we found that buyers were willing to speak with their wallets in terms of buying these homes at $450 per square foot. And there is a place where you can find, through the Appraisal Institute, qualified appraisers throughout the United States. So appraisers that have gone through the Valuation of Sustainable Buildings program. There's a website for that. There's a dozen of them in Mass. There's a dozen or so in Connecticut. And again, we do have the right to demand a qualified appraiser and turn down an appraiser when they call you and say, "Hey, Craig, can I meet you Wednesday at 2 to appraise the property?" And I ask their name, and I say, "No, you can't because you're not on the Valuation of Sustainable Buildings list." And they're like, "WTF are you talking about?" And I said, "Just so you know, we're demanding a qualified appraiser. There's a letter for this. Send this backwards to your appraisal management company and let them know you got a listing agent that's a pain in the ass, and they're demanding a qualified appraiser." So we have the right to do that, and that's in our seller's best interest, obviously, to do that, to make sure that this is valued appropriately in the marketplace. Next slide. This is the letter that I was referring to. You can find it on Green Dot Realtor. At the bottom of the appraisal drop-down menu, it's a Word doc where you can download the letter that demands a qualified appraiser. I upload this into the MLS for the listings that I have that fit into this high-performance category. I make sure that the buyer initials that, knows that we're demanding a qualified appraiser as a condition for my seller accepting the offer. So this authorizes me to talk to the mortgage originator, to say to the appraisals, I'm turning it down because we have this letter that's signed. Next piece. And the appraisers, you know, all the way back to 2009, the Appraisal Institute produced this 5-page document called the Residential Green Energy Efficient Addendum. This is a very important document, right? And again, qualified appraisers that have gone through that Valuation of Sustainable Buildings program, know how to use this document to make a case to the bank underwriter that there is in fact contributory value here for this home, and this lays out the reasons for them to do this. So this is a very important tool that as a listing agent, I want my builder to fill this out, and I hand to the qualified appraiser when I'm meeting him or her to appraise the property, so that they can use this to make a case to the bank underwriter about the contributory value of the home. Next. And with homes that the homeowner owns the system, we call those host-owned systems, there's a tool out there called the PV value tool, where we can calculate as a listing agent the contributory value using an income approach for the remaining life of that solar PV system. And again, if I do that for just a home that has solar PV, there's a 1-page printout that is given to you that you can spit out on your printer, and then I upload that into the MLS when I'm listing a home with host-owned solar PV. So I can just show to the buyer's agent that there's a process, buyers what of the contributory value of these systems. Next slide.
Right. That's the end.
Good, perfect.
Perfect timing. Yeah, we're a few minutes over, so I appreciate everybody's time with us here today. We went through a lot of stuff, and honestly, you couldn't tell me and Craig could keep talking about this for even longer. But I want to thank everyone for being here today. We can stick around for a few moments if folks have additional questions. But otherwise, I'll just say thank you so much for being here. Craig, any last thoughts?
Well, I think a lot of this stuff for realtors that are just getting used to this is it's like drinking from a fire hose, you know. But I can tell you that the more you do it, the more you're engaged in this part of the market, the more experienced you become here, the more fluent you become in this language. It's a huge benefit to your business, and it's only going to be I think we're at the point in this part of the real estate business where, you know, you got to get with it or get left behind there. You know, every team of real estate agents in the United States should have a green designated agent, so that, you know, just in case you get one of these listings, you have somebody that you can refer that business to that actually knows what they're talking about and is a benefit to the client, which is the most important thing here.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, Craig, Aaron, thank you so much for joining us today. And again, thanks to the sponsors of Energize Connecticut for putting today's session on. Again, if you have questions that didn't get answered today, please send them to us at the email address at the bottom of the screen there, passfiltrainingct@icf.com. And we will send out a link to the recording as well as the slide deck from today to everyone who registered for the training, as well as a post-session survey if you could fill that out. So thanks again, Craig and Aaron, appreciate your time, and thanks to everyone who joined. Have a great day, everyone.